Hello, BookTube, and welcome to my weekly reading vlog. These are all the books I've been reading this week. I know. It's a lot, so consequently, I'm going to try and get through this as quick as possible and not talk about any one book in any too much detail. We'll see how I do on this. Brevity is not always my strong point, but Dracula. I finished it earlier this week. I've already reviewed it, so nothing more to say about that. Dracula is all finished now and off of my reading list. And Journey to the West. Finished it. Reviewed it earlier this week. I did two videos. One a recap slash review of Volume 4 only. And then since Volume 4 is the last volume in the series, I did a recap and review of the whole book. I was about to say whole series, but it's really just one novel split into 4 parts. And then, I'm not sure if this is a good idea or not, but I decided, okay, one Chinese classic under my belt. Why not go for 2? Well, I'm in the zone. So, Three Kingdoms, picked it up from my library. I've read the first chapter. I am into the second chapter here. How far am I into the second chapter? About midway through the second chapter. No, strike that. Almost done with the second chapter. So I made a started video about this when I talked about how I had been interested in this book ever since I realized how popular it was in Japan. It's not a Japanese book, it's a Chinese book, but very popular in Japan, at least when I was in Japan, in terms of comic book adaptations, anime adaptations, and video game adaptations. And I think among maybe hardcore video gamers, it's since achieved somewhat of reputation around the world. Probably not your average man on the street, but maybe people who play video games. I mention that because I've been looking for podcasts and support to help me understand some of this book. And it's interesting how many of those people say that they got into this book because of video games. So that does seem to be a thing. So I'm what did I do this week? I read the 20 pages publisher's introduction. I read chapter 1. Now there are so many notes in chapter 1. The notes are all in the back of the book. You can see this is one of those books where I have one bookmark for the main text and one bookmark for the notes because I keep flipping back to the notes. There were 33 footnotes in chapter 1, and a chapter that was only 19 pages, 33 bookmarks. So, it was like, 33 in notes. So I was constantly flipping to the back. So what I did eventually is I just ignored the notes until I finished the chapter, then went back and looked at the chapter again and caught up on all the notes. Fortunately, it looks like the other chapters don't have quite as much notes, so maybe there's just a lot to set up in chapter 1. This is a historical fiction about a period in Chinese history where the Han Dynasty dissolved into a period of 3 warring kingdoms. It's based off of the historical annals, but is classified as a novel, although it doesn't always read like a novel. It kind of reads like like the Old Testament history or something like that. I don't know if it will become more novelistic as I go on. There are, even within that first chapter, just so many names that are dumped on the reader. They're just listing names of court officials, and because they're Chinese names, they're difficult for me to keep track of. I mean, any names that are not English are difficult for me to keep track of. But there are so many characters whose names seem to be the same with just a letter switched around. There's a good example here when I was talking about the rebel chiefs. There was Zhao Hung and Han Zong. So the Z and the H are just sent around. These are two different rebel leaders. So it's one thing to recognize them when they're right next to each other, but when you encounter the same name 10 pages later, you're like, okay, which Chinese name was this again? All that being said, I am following things more or less. I've had to go back a few times and check the names and to remind myself just to keep track who the characters are. But I'm following it so far. At the moment, there's a Han Dynasty. It's weak. It's being taken over by corrupt eunuchs who form like a group of 10 corrupt eunuchs. Because the Han Dynasty is so corrupt and weak, there is a rebellion in what in this translation is referred to as the Yellow Scarves Rebellion. On Wikipedia, it's referred to as the Yellow Turban Rebellion. And the Yellow Turban or Yellow Scarves Rebellion is threatening the Han Dynasty, so all the loyal retainers of the Emperor have to go out and fight the rebels. In the midst of this, there are 3 young men who pledge themselves to fight the rebels and pledge brotherhood to each other under a peach tree. They take the oath of a peach tree. And these, I guess, will become some of the 3 main characters in the novel. They are not, by the way, the leaders of the 3 kingdoms. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to evolve, but I know enough just from the publisher's introduction that it's 2 other guys who are going to lead the 2 other kingdoms. So I guess these 3 guys are just all going to be within one kingdom. I don't know. We'll see how this evolves. That's the magic of reading this for the first time. And so they're putting down the rebellion from the Yellow Scarves. And that is all of chapter 1. Takes us into a bit of chapter 2, although chapter 2 we get into a little bit of how screwed over they get after they put down the rebellion and they don't really get thanked by the emperor because of the corrupt eunuchs. So lots of names to keep track of, lots of alliances to keep track of. That being said, there's a certain part of me which is intimidated by this. And there's a certain part of me which is really loving this. And it's one of those things, I don't think you can describe it to somebody if they don't already have the disease themselves. But if you have the disease, you'll know what I mean. You history nerds out there who just love getting into something complicated and learning all the alliances and learning all the names and stuff like that. I'm still a little bit unsure. I'm going to be able to keep track of everything as we go through here, but it seems complicated, but fascinatingly complicated at the same time. I'm researching podcasts to help me. And I'll post a podcast on my blog that I listen to kind of help me dissect this novel. There are a few different podcasts made by people who kind of go through the novel chapter by chapter and discuss it. I'm gonna check out some of those. I'm a little bit reluctant to give up my podcasting time because I'm supposed to be, I'm still working my way through Mike Duncan's Revolutions podcast. In the middle of my 3rd listen through of season 7, The Revolutions of 1848, and really enjoying it. But I'm going to see if I can maybe alternate 3 Kingdoms podcast with the Revolutions of 1848 podcasts. Then still working my way through Wolf Hall, the 3rd book in the Thomas Cromwell trilogy. This week I read from pages 180 to 216. Finished part 1. Just got to the start of part 2. There is a lot of interesting intrigue in here. I'm going to make the same comment I make every time when I talk about this, which is it moves really slow. I mean, there are pages of description like 6 pages at a time or something, just talking about Thomas Cromwell's reflecting on his life's journey, or reflecting on the men he sent to their deaths in the previous book. So all this kind of reflecting and character study makes the actual plot move very slow. But there is definitely plot taking place here. The king's illegitimate son has died, who was, what was the name of his son? It was referred to as Fitzroy here. I forget the name of his first name. Was it Henry? Was his sorry, this is Henry Fitzroy. What was the name of King Henry's illegitimate son? Yeah, Henry Fitzroy, the Duke of Richmond. Yeah, sorry. The reason I had such a hard time remembering his first name is throughout the novel he's either referred to as Fitzroy or he's referred to as Richmond, where he's the Duke. So that's a blow to Henry VIII. Now he's just left with his 2 daughters. Of course, he will have a son, but that's going to be coming later in the novel. Yeah, there's some more intriguing here. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I don't want to get too in depth on any one book, so I'm going to put this one aside. All right, and then I've added 2 more reading projects to my roster. Actually, they're not new reading projects. They're books that I started and just didn't keep with, and now I want to come back to them. So we'll start with the Bible first. Longtime viewers of this channel may remember last year, almost 2 years ago now, I embarked on a reread through the Bible. And I got through Genesis, and I got through Exodus, and I got through halfway through Leviticus, and then I just stalled out. The reasons for stalling out, I think, were threefold. First reason being the COVID shutdown was ending in Vietnam, and I was going back to face-to-face teaching, meaning I was going back to working in the school building and doing my meetings in the office and stuff like that. During the COVID shutdown, it was relatively easy to keep a number of books going because everything was always at my elbow. When I'm taking a book to work, I don't want to be lugging my whole library with me on my backpack going into work. So it means that this book was staying on my shelves at home. For a while, I was reading it at night, like a chapter of the Bible a night, which is what I did way back when I read the Bible for the first time through back in 7th grade. But then I started getting out comic books from my school library. And if you've been watching this channel, you'll know that I've started talking about comic books a lot in the past couple years. And comic books have kind of taken over the nighttime reading, which means the Bible got edged out. I know that sounds sacrilegious to put comic books in front of the Bible. And then the other reason is just I had hit a really boring part of the Bible. Leviticus is really boring. But for all that, I never meant to stop reading. It was just I got a little busy one week, then I got a little bit busy the next, and I just kept meaning to pick this up again. And for the past year, it's been over a year now. Last summer 2022 is when I was last reading this. But during all that time, I kept meaning to get back into it. And I was thinking while I was reading Dracula, during the month of October, I'm going to prioritize getting through Dracula, but after that, I really should get back to my reading projects. So previously I had been, I forget what I had been, up to Leviticus 13 or something. But since that was over about a year and a half ago now, I decided to just start at the beginning again. Started at Leviticus 1. I'm now through Leviticus 10. It's about 10 pages in this edition of the Bible. I think my goal is going to be read maybe 1 or 2 pages every night, which is going to be about a couple chapters usually on average. And again, when I read this as a youngster, back when I was in 7th and 8th grade, I did a chapter a night. And you could read the Bible in 3.5 years if you did a chapter every night. So if I do a couple chapters every night, then I'm on better track than I was when I read this the first time. And that will probably be good enough for me. Leviticus is really boring. These books of the law are boring. They're talking a lot about the sacrificial rituals, and yet I'm trying to approach this with the glass half full, trying to see what's of interest in the sacrificial rituals. Well, one of the things that struck me since I kind of gave up on this book a year and a half ago, I've read the Iliad and the Odyssey, or reread them, and was noticing. I mean, I knew this, but I was reminded of how the Greeks were sacrificing animals was a big part of their religion and culture. Actually, in the part of Three Kingdoms that I was reading for this week, they were sacrificing animals to the gods here in ancient China. So not only a Mediterranean thing, but I guess a worldwide thing during this era, animal sacrifice. So it is just interesting to read how it goes down. And they talk about the different types of animal sacrifice. One where the whole animal gets burned up and there's nothing left. One where it's a communion meal with God, so you get part of it and God gets part of it. God's portion gets burned up completely. They talk about the rights of the priests, so what the priests get. Now, I'm not sure if the parts that the priests get come out of God's parts or come out of the human parts. There are a few questions I had about this. And then, it's just generally interesting to take this as a record of maybe what life was like in the whenever this was written. And when was this written? If I remember right, from when I was reading some books on biblical scholarship about 10 years ago now, this was supposedly collected and edited in the 4th century and was put into its final form in the 4th century BC, but had been from pre-existing documents that would have been older than that. But, they talk about, when they're talking about the grain offerings made to God, they're talking about how you must salt every oblation. Oblation is the grain offering you make to God. So, salt was readily available in this world. That's a little historical detail. And they talk about how, you must offer roasted corn or bread made from ground corn. So corn was readily available in this world. Somehow I had in my head that corn came from Indians in North America. This is another thing I really should have looked up on Wikipedia before I started this video. I'm always on this on camera musing about things I could easily just look up. But there's something to look up after I finish this video. Where did corn come from? Apparently the ancient Israelites had it. So those kind of things are maybe things that you can find interest in just reading through all these sacrificial rituals, even though it gets kind of boring. But I do want to get back into this. I'm making such horrible progress that it's embarrassing to say, but the reason I wanted to reread the Bible is because I wanted to try and work my way through the classics of the Western canon. And every so often I go into my school library and look at some of the ancient Greek plays or look at the Epic of Gilgamesh and think, I should really read all the classics. And then I think to myself, I never finished the Bible. I mean, it's a reread, but it was 30 years ago now that I read it as a youngster, so time to get back into it. So it means I have to go back and the Bible is like the ground zero of the Western literary canon, the 101, the building block of it. So if you don't finish the Bible, you haven't finished the project. So I'm going to get back into that. The other thing I'm going to try and get back into is reading for professional development. So on my currently reading list, I've got 4 books now that I started reading for professional development and I didn't finish them. And this one is one of them. I started this, when did I start this? I think way back in 2018. Let me double check. I've got the date on my blog. Yeah, I started in 2018. I stopped and started it again many times during 2018, 2019, and then just have not started it again, I think since 2019, but always been meaning to. I've got to take my professional development seriously, work my way through these books, so I'm going to try and do a little bit of this every day as well. So that, not counting the books I finished, so Dracula and Journey to the West, I've finished now. They're off my list. But then that still leaves me 4 books that I'm going to try and balance out now with this new reading project, which is pushing it, especially with 2 kids and 3 jobs. If you have kids, you know what it's like, and I've got 2 young ones right now, both of them under 5. Your time's not your own. I finish work, but I don't have free time when I come home. So, but I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try and work through these, and certainly not gonna add anything to this for the foreseeable future. I'm gonna hold myself to that. No new reading projects until I finish at least a couple of these. And then the comic books. So The Incredible Hulk, Crossroads. I read about 40 pages of this. He's still stuck at the crossroads. There are... Yeah, the beginning of this volume, the crossroads, was where Doctor Strange had banished him to. And it was a land in which he could choose between many different... He was like at the crossroads of the multiverse, and he could choose many different pathways, like this panel. And the conceit was the many different universes he went into, and the many different weird things he encountered there. But they seem to have, I don't know, they ran out of ideas or something. Now they're just having his old supervillain foes wind up in the crossroads with them. So he fought the UFOs, which apparently he had encountered in a previous storyline. And now there's this energy-sucking monster. What is it? Klaatu, the accursed energy eater from the stars. And then there's this ship of aliens which is pursuing him. And this is all hearkening back to a previous storyline in the Hulk. These are flashbacks from the last time they met up, which is, there's always a footnote here explaining where that is. Where's the footnote? This was in some previous Incredible Hulk issue. They've recruited Hulk again, and Hulk is rowing on their ship, and they're after the Energy Eater. It's interesting. There are a number of interesting things about it. I think this might be more interesting if I had read the previous issues and known the whole story. But that was always the fun thing about comic books, at least for my money when I was young, is knowing that there's a bigger story out there that you only ever got to absorb in pieces. So some sort of bigger story out there in which the cyborg captain had some sort of revenge against this Klaatu, the Star Eater, and some sort of backstory with the Hulk, which is alluded to here. Yeah, it's relatively interesting. Okay, I got through all of them. So that's my reading for this week, and we'll see how I fare for the next week. But I'll see you next week, BookTube.